Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me? We're gonna get started with our program. Thank you all for coming. Welcome to the 2021 Audubon New York Keesee Award Luncheon. I'm Mike Berger. I'm the Executive Director of Audubon's Connecticut and New York Regional Program. And it's great to be here in person. Seeing all of you at the tavern on the green. A lot of familiar faces out there today. Thank you for coming. It's been a long time since we've seen each other. I also want to thank those of you who are joining us remotely. I hope the weather wherever you are is as nice as it is here, because it's gorgeous here today. Closed captioning for today's event is provided through Zoom. So today's luncheon marks a milestone, the 20th anniversary of the Thomas W. Keesee Jr. Conservation Award. And it's a special honor for me to be hosting this gathering of our region's most dedicated and passionate bird conservationists. An amazing group of people whose work has made a measurable impact on birds in our region and beyond. You may have noticed that I introduced myself as the director of Audubon's Connecticut and New York program. That's because since we last got together for this event, those two state programs have merged and are now one program of Audubon. It's similar to how other programs across the country have merged into regional programs for Audubon. In fact, the first event that I had the pleasure of emceeing since we sort of came out of these pandemic restrictions was Audubon Connecticut's Environmental Leadership Awards event, which took place in June. And I'm really happy to see that we have some guests from Connecticut joining us today. Thank you for coming. For 20 years, Audubon New York has presented the Keesee Award to individuals whose work has had an outsized impact on birds and the places they need across our region. And everyone knows just how much birds need our help today. The golden-winged warbler, wood thrush, and other forest birds are suffering from habitat loss and declining forest health. Meanwhile, predators, human disturbance, and other threats are imperiling coastal birds like piping plover, American oystercatcher, and the salt marsh sparrow. And as if all that wasn't enough, climate change is putting the very future of these birds and many other species in question. That's why Audubon works with private forest owners and agencies to manage forests in bird-friendly ways. It's why we steward beach nesting birds and lead critical salt marsh restoration work throughout the Long Island Sound area. And it's why we work so hard to expand public awareness about the very real threat that climate change poses to our birds through initiatives like the Audubon Mural Project, which you'll hear more about this afternoon. We're at a critical juncture in history. The decisions we make today are going to determine the future of our birds and people in very real ways. Young people today are painfully aware of the environmental future their generation faces. They're ready and willing to change the future of the planet, but too many of them are seeing the challenge of the downward trajectory that they've experienced throughout their world or their lives. And it seems daunting, and understandably so. Fortunately, though, inspiring and empowering people to take action on behalf of birds is something that Audubon has been really good at. Large or tiny, majestic or vulnerable, colorful or camouflaged, birds help us tap into our unbreakable bond with nature. We're using the power of birds to build a new generation of smart, motivated, and optimistic conservationists in our region. We have a great program lined up today. We'll celebrate the legacy of Thomas W. Keesee Jr. and 20 years of Keesee Award recipients. We'll hear from best-selling author and ornithologist Scott Weidensaul, whose life work has been all about getting people excited about birds and nature and taking action on their behalf. And we'll recognize the artists of the Audubon Mural Project an exciting initiative that's drawing public attention to the threat that climate change poses to birds. So thank you for joining us here today. Thank you for your support. I hope you enjoy this program. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Marshall Johnson, Audubon's Acting Chief Conservation Officer. I was thrilled when I heard the news that Elizabeth Gray, in her capacity as acting CEO of Audubon, had named Marshall to this position. Marshall's work at Audubon, leading the Audubon Dakotas program for 10 years, and most recently Audubon's market-based conservation ranching program, has demonstrated a real commitment to enduring change on the ground that benefits birds, their habitats, the land, and the people who work the land. Whether he's protecting critical sandhill crane habitat or using the market for bird-friendly beef to drive sound land management, Marshall has always been more about the steak than the sizzle. Please welcome my friend and colleague, Marshall Johnson.
Thank you, Mike. Can you guys hear me pretty well? Thank you, Mike. I'd like to start by congratulating Mike on your new role as Connecticut and New York Executive Director. I've worked with Mike for more than 13 years since I started at Audubon. You could say that we sort of grew up together at Audubon. So, Mike, are we still young? Are we still... It wouldn't be me. I feel like I've been here longer than Methuselah. But we've basically grown up together. Mike is a brilliant and yet down-to-earth and dedicated conservationist. And I'm thrilled that he's now steering the Audubon New York and Connecticut program. Thank you for everything you've done, Mike, and everything you will do. Can we give a hand for Mike Berger? I cannot tell you or describe how enthusiastic and encouraged I am to be with you here today. I want to send a special thank you and warm wishes from our acting CEO, Dr. Elizabeth Gray. I can tell you as a former state director, I am buoyed by the passion she has for the field, and she's really committed to putting the wind in the sails of the work that we do throughout the field. So Elizabeth Gray sends her best. The Audubon movement, the Audubon family has been the only professional family that I've ever known. And when you are a small part of a tradition that spans over 100 years, you quickly come to learn and appreciate the names like Thomas Keesee, Dr. John Challey, Stephen Bechtel, Marjorie Nicholson, and so many more. 20 years ago today, not today, but 20 years ago, the first Tom Keesee Award was presented to someone many of you know and knew personally, Donald O'Brien Jr. Don celebrated the beauty and wonder of birds every day as a conservation leader, as a fundraiser, and as an artist. Thank you, Katie O'Brien, for your tireless efforts and being such a steadfast torchbearer of the legacy you and Donald built together. And thank you so much for being a great friend. Sir Isaac Newton made famous a bit of wisdom that was first shared in the 12th century. If I was able to see a bit further, it was because I stood on the shoulders of giants. We call people like Thomas Keesee giants because for their willingness to answer the call when birds and nature needed them most, to meet the challenges of their time. Birds and nature need the Audubon movement more today than they ever have before. And science has confirmed what you all see at your bird feeders and on your hikes and on different trails and in different fields. We are losing our birds. Since 1970, more than 3 billion birds have been lost, and further habitat and climate change are now the leading threat to the birds that remain. Our feathered songstresses and troubadours who have filled our lives with song are calling out to us with their silence. 2.5 billion of these birds are what we call migratory birds, spending the majority of their lives outside of the United States. In truth, protecting migratory birds requires us to follow them everywhere along their flight path and along their life cycles, to be for them at every stage of those annual life cycles. And that means expanding our work throughout the hemisphere, much like Donald O'Brien asked Audubon to do more than 30 years ago through our partnership with BirdLife International. In order to transform science into on-the-ground conservation impact at hemispheric scale, we'll need to support strong state and regional offices like right here in New York and Connecticut, and our new ambitious international program, Audubon Americas, where we are working with partners to take our work to scale from Latin America to the Caribbean and to Canada's boreal forests. Audubon's Migratory Bird Initiative, our MBI, will be the engine that drives this work, the thread that stitches together all of the Audubon network in pursuit of a better future for our birds. Bird conservation has typically focused on specific known locations that are important to birds, sometimes finding out that while we help them in one area, our birds face perilous challenges somewhere else in their journey. Well, the MBI is empowering us with unprecedented insights and information to solve this problem. By aggregating the latest migratory bird data, all of this disparate data in one place, we're able to, along with our partners, pinpoint the threats birds face at every step of their migratory journeys. With this information, we'll be able to develop the most effective strategies to help address the conservation challenges driving bird loss and make decisions quickly and with greater confidence than ever before. And we'll get the highest possible conservation return on our dollar. This initiative doesn't just benefit scientists. Through the MBI platform, we're empowering everyone and anyone who loves nature to follow their local birds throughout their life cycles and seeing all the hazards that they encounter and learning how they can take action through Audubon. Nothing short of a bird revolution, the Migratory Bird Initiative can thread together all that we are as Audubon. Yes, our birds and the earth we share face colossal challenges, but I remain unabashedly optimistic and encouraged. And I'll let you in on a little secret why. Because there are giants in this room today. Thank you. Speaking of someone who stands tall, our next speaker that I'd like to bring to the stage is someone who truly understands the significance of Audubon's deeply local roots and a springboard for hemispheric actions. Sally Jeffords has been involved with Audubon for more than 3 decades. Chair of Audubon New York's board, Sally also serves on the boards of National Audubon, New York City Audubon, and throughout the Audubon network. We are indebted to Sally for her tireless efforts on behalf of birds and the places they need. And there's no more fitting person to tell us more about the incredible conservationists who've received the Keesee Award over the past 20 years than Sally Jeffords. Please join me.
Well, that was a surprise. I was just told I was supposed to introduce the film that you're about to see now. But thank you, Marshall. And thank you, Marshall, for joining us today. It's quite an honor to have you here. I'd like to say welcome, everyone. And thank you all for joining in our celebration of birds and people doing so much to protect them. It's an honor to be serving as chair of the Audubon New York Board of Directors during the 20th anniversary of the Keesee Award Luncheon. We've recognized so many outstanding conservationists over the last 20 years, individuals who have shown remarkable leadership and commitment, particularly in New York State, to Audubon's mission. The roster of past awardees have included George Pataki, as you remember, he was our governor, a lover of public parks who protected more than 1 million acres of habitat during his tenure. Alexander Zagorius, a staunch advocate for a clean Hudson River. He's there somewhere. There he is. Susan and Coleman Burke, seed funders of our Audubon Center for Native Plants. Adrian Benepe, former New York City Parks Commissioner and current president, thank you, president and CEO of the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. And Ginny Stowe, a tenacious lover of birds and founder of our For the Birds program, empowering New York City students to take an active interest in protecting their local environment. Well, thank you all that are here today. It's an honor to have you back again. Every Keesee Award recipient possesses their own special gifts and passions. Each came to conservation on a different path, but they all met where the birds are. The biggest and best conservation happens when extraordinary people with diverse talents and skills combine efforts for an important cause, enabling us to advance conservation solutions from every angle, advocating for bird-friendly policies, restoring damaged habitat, educating the next generation, and managing private and public lands to benefit birds. And that's what Audubon does. We bring together people of all ages, from all walks of life, and we leverage their unique skills to benefit birds and the places they meet. The planet has never been in greater need of effective conservation solutions. Audubon is where the best and brightest come together to deliver long-lasting conservation results. I'd like you now to please sit back and enjoy this retrospective of 20 years of the Thomas W. Keesee Jr. Conservation Award. Thank you.
His passion really in life was the Audubon Society and birding and just the outdoors.
The Thomas W. Jr. Conservation Award. It's been in existence since 2001. They give an award in his name to an individual or corporation who have done something significant in conservation, and particularly bird conservation.
The Audubon Society decided to create this award because of his leadership and dedication and innovation, really, for raising awareness that people become educated on the need to protect our birds.
Each year there's one award given to celebrate Audubon's mission and to honor an honoree.
It was such an honor to get the Keesee Award because there was such a wonderful array of conservation leaders who had gotten it before me and then who have gotten it since. Leaders like Wendy Polson, including very recently Gregory Long, Allison Whipple Rockefeller, all these people. And to see, like, I'm part of this group, that was such an honor.
The award, which is such an honor for our family, is not just sort of a fluff award. It's so significant in that it recognizes the people around the world that are fighting this battle of protecting our environment and saving the birds. And I know that my father would be really proud to know that he had any part in being an inspiration for people.
I hope you were all as inspired by that as I was. Now please welcome the Vice Chair of our Board of Directors, Vicki Shaw.
Thank you, Sally. It's such a pleasure to be together once again. We so appreciate your sharing and supporting this moment. It's my pleasure today to introduce today's special guest speaker, Scott Weidensaul. Scott has dedicated much of his life to an increased understanding of the complexities of migration. And as you've heard already, migration is a critical aspect in bird conservation. Scott is an exceptional individual, a widely recognized and admired author, ornithologist, researcher, naturalist, educator, and longtime friend of Audubon. He serves as the director of field ornithology at Hog Island Audubon Camp and is a contributing editor to Audubon magazine. He's also co-founder of Project Snowstorm, which tracks and studies snowy owls, and of the Critical Connections Project, which is tracking birds which breed on national parklands in Alaska. And he was the first inaugural recipient. He was not the first. He was the inaugural recipient of the Audubon New York Award for Environmental Writing. Scott traces his passion for birds back to the age of 12, when he experienced an extraordinary event while hiking in the Appalachians. At one point, he looked up and saw, soaring over his head, thousands of migrating hawks taking advantage of a strong northwest wind. From that day on, birds would be central to his life. Scott began his writing career at a local newspaper with weekly natural history columns, and he's been writing about nature, wildlife, and especially birds ever since. He has published more than 30 books to date. His latest book, which you have at your fingertips, is A World on the Wing. My paper is starting to get migrating. The book explores the research on bird conservation over the last 20 years. This research has led to remarkable and new insights into how birds are able to conquer the seemingly impossible task of migrating thousands of miles every year. Like all of Scott's books, it touches both mind and spirit and enhances one's appreciation for birds and the challenges they face. Without doubt, Scott has a special gift, capturing his readers' attention, expanding their knowledge, and helping them navigate and even soar with the birds to whom he is dedicating himself. But while individual birds display extraordinary strength and tenacity, species, as Scott and others have said, indicates species are struggling mightily. As we know, we've lost 3 billion birds in the past 50 years, and climate change threatens 2/3 of North American species with extinction. For those who work to protect birds, the job is never done. The good news is that all of us in this room and those joining us virtually are motivated that much more to do our part to help. May I introduce and welcome Scott.
Hello. Thank you very much, Vicki. It is a pleasure and an honor to be back at the Keesee Award Luncheon, and a real privilege to share this event with the past honorees who've collectively made such a difference for conservation. It's also a real charge to be following Marshall up to the stage. I got to get me one of those hats. We're gathered here in the heart of autumn migration when on any given night, and particularly tonight, when the weather's good, there may be between 1/2 and 3/4 of a billion birds flying south across North America. A flood tide of wings knitting together every part of this hemisphere and well beyond. Right now, there are red-necked phalaropes that breed in eastern Canada that are en route to their wintering grounds on the Pacific coast off Ecuador. There are Arctic terns that bred in Maine that are winging their way to the Indian Ocean, while Hudsonian godwits from the Northwest Territories have just arrived in southern Chile, which is a journey of about 9,000 miles. Tonight, blackpoll warblers that each weigh less than half an ounce are going to take off from the shores of New England on a 4-day flight across the western Atlantic that will carry them all the way to Venezuela, which is impressive, except that not too long ago, sorry about that, which is impressive enough, except that not too long ago, bar-tailed godwits from Alaska completed a 7,700-mile nonstop flight encompassing 11 days across the widest part of the Pacific Ocean, continuous flight all the way from Alaska to the coast of New Zealand and Australia. I've been infatuated with migration all of my life. I'm dazzled by migrating raptors at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary in Pennsylvania when I was a kid. Since the 1980s, I've been increasingly involved in migration research, which is a field that seems more and more akin to science fiction these days as we uncover the physical feats that migratory birds perform. A little semi-palmated sandpiper, less than 6 inches long, will fly 3,300 miles from the coast of Nova Scotia all the way to the northeastern coast of South America. A sprint that is the equivalent of a human being running 126 consecutive marathons with no food or water or rest. We've learned recently that several species of European swifts spend up to 10 months in continuous flight, in migration while they're on their wintering grounds in Africa, which is amazing, except that young city terns, when they leave their tropical nesting islands in the Pacific, will spend 4 or 5 years in continuous flight before they finally come back to land in order to breed. And by the way, these birds are able to sleep on the wing because they put alternating halves of their brain to rest a couple of seconds at a time. We've even recently discovered that birds navigate by using a form of quantum physics known as entanglement that was so bizarre that even Einstein, out of whose equations it grew, disavowed it. Ironically, just as we've begun to understand how truly dazzling migration is, we've also had to reckon with how much we've lost. Since I started birding in the 1960s, as you've heard a couple of times today, we've lost almost 3 billion birds, a third of North America's avifauna. We know that the challenges facing the birds that remain are daunting and becoming more so. But I take comfort from the remarkable resiliency that birds have always shown, and also from the gathering force and focus of those who fight for them, including the National Audubon Society. The pandemic opened a lot of people's eyes to the beauty and the drama and the solace that birds represent, and to the ubiquity of bird life, even in the heart of the largest urban centers like New York City. Tonight, tens of millions of birds will head south through the east. And come daybreak, many of them are going to be looking for food and safety and shelter across the 5 boroughs of New York City, dropping into parks and vacant lots, old landfills, and shorelines. Thousands of New Yorkers who, before the pandemic, never would have spared a thought for birds are going to see them and care about them and want to know more about them. And it is our job to turn those folks into fierce advocates for birds and for the wider natural world that supports them. We have a generational opportunity right now to change things for the better for birds, and very little time in which to do it. Birds are everywhere and ought to be for everyone. That's one reason why, especially as a failed college art major, I'm such a big fan of the Audubon Mural Project, about which you're going to hear more in a moment. Bringing the birds of America to the walls and streets of New York, courtesy of a flock of incredibly talented artists, is a perfect way to open eyes and minds to the wonders of birds, even in the biggest urban centers. And it's not just about making city dwellers more aware of the beauty over their heads. Improving urban landscapes for birds is critical for bird conservation, if only because we know that metropolitan light pollution draws millions of migrant birds, especially naive young birds on their first migration, into urban centers. And so enhancing and protecting bird habitat in urban parks and green spaces needs to be a priority for us as bird conservationists. And better habitat for birds means a better, more livable world for people. Somewhere to the north of here, right now, there is a songbird, maybe a thrush, maybe a warbler, that will fly tonight to New York City. Tomorrow at daybreak, it will find a green oasis somewhere among the concrete, maybe in Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx, Forest Park in Queens, or Fort Tryon Park in Washington Heights. It will find greenery and food and a respite from its journey. And I hope that somebody who has never really seen a wild bird before, maybe someone whose imagination was touched by one of those glorious murals, will see the flicker of movement and stop and feel the spark. And another bird advocate will be born. Thank you all so much for the chance to share this event with you today. So now let's go fight the good fight for the birds and for ourselves. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Scott. It's always an honor to have you at this event. It's really great that you're part of our flock. Tom Keesee was passionate about Audubon's ability to build support for bird conservation at the grassroots level. And that's what we're doing through the Audubon Mural Project. 2 years ago, Audubon released our groundbreaking climate report, Survival by Degrees, predicting that 2/3 of North American bird species will experience significant range declines as a result of climate change, perhaps facing an existential threat. While this news is troubling, the report also provided hope. If we take decisive action now, we can improve the futures of 3/4 of those climate-threatened birds. A partnership of Audubon and Gittler and Gallery, the Mural Project is raising public awareness about this important issue in a big, bold way. We're commissioning local artists to paint stunning murals highlighting threatened species in public spaces throughout Upper Manhattan, many in communities that are often excluded from conversations about the environment. The bald eagle, black-bellied plover, roseate spoonbill, Townsend's warbler, western tanager, I'm not making these up, and 126 other species now adorn buildings, storefront grills, and other public spaces. And the project will continue until every climate-threatened species is represented. These works of art support artists, beautify neighborhoods, spark wonder and joy in passersby, and inspire in them a concern for the welfare of birds and nature. So it's our pleasure today to welcome 3 individuals to speak more about the successes of the Audubon Mural Project. Avi Gittler is an art dealer and the director of the Gittler and Gallery. He curates community and art simultaneously and makes accessibility a primary focus of his gallery's program. As co-creator of the Audubon Mural Project, he has helped grow the project from one mural in northern Manhattan to a vast public art initiative that has since been adopted in cities across the United States. Jessica Mafia is a visual artist born and raised right here in New York City. Her work has been exhibited throughout the United States, and she's currently in production on a mural for the Audubon Mural Project. And Elizabeth Loris Ritter chairs Manhattan Community Board 12's Parks and Cultural Affairs Committee, where she has been a powerful voice for arts funding and programming in northern Manhattan. We'll hear from Avi, Jessica, and Liz in just a moment, but first, Audubon Mural Project artist Yumi Rodriguez will take us uptown to learn more.
Hello, I'm Yumi Rodriguez, and this is the Audubon Mural Project, a public art initiative to raise awareness to birds and climate change. We're in northern Manhattan, where artists have been painting many of the species listed in Audubon's groundbreaking climate report, Survival by Degrees, 389 bird species on the brink. The National Audubon Society and Gittler and Gallery began this project in this neighborhood, where the gifted bird artist John James Audubon once lived. Now more than 100 birds can be found on walls, doors, and other surfaces. Climate change threatens the food and habitat that these birds will need to survive. It also puts people at risk, and the local residents are especially vulnerable to the effects of climate change, like extreme heat and flooding. Birds are a symbol of hope, and it's uplifting to see them appear in unexpected places all over the neighborhood. This is the awesome greater sage grouse. They rely on a sagebrush ecosystem threatened by fossil fuel extraction. Painted by artist George Barugi. The trumpeter swans are made entirely of recycled materials, like glass and ceramics. The artists Carlos Pinto and John Sear created the mosaic in their Brooklyn studio and installed it during the pandemic. Trumpeter swans made a spectacular comeback after being hunted to near extinction, but now most of their breeding range could be lost to climate change. The dominoes here are reminiscent to the culture: Dominican Republic, Washington Heights, and Puerto Rico. They really speak to the community. And we also partner with local schools and organizations like Creative Artworks, who pays youth artists to paint murals. This is the white-tailed hawk, painted by artist Totem. He grew up and lives in the neighborhood. He worked at New York Presbyterian throughout the pandemic and wanted to bring something beautiful and positive to the neighborhood. Cutting the trajectory of global warming in half would help the hawk retain its breeding range in the United States. Climate change is here, and we have to save the birds in these murals and the environment that we all share.
Thank you so much, Yumi. I'll talk in a moment a little bit more about Yumi Rodriguez, whom you just saw in the video. Before I engage Liz and Jessica, I just want to tell a quick anecdote unrelated to the Audubon Mural Project. A couple months ago, when it came to my attention that I would be speaking after Scott Weidensaul, I called my local bookstore and I asked them to hold a copy of A World on the Wing for me. And about 30 minutes later, I went to the bookstore, and for 20 minutes, they could not find the book. They couldn't find it anywhere. And then finally, after talking to everybody in the store, they said, well, we filed it under T, but I spell my name Gitler. And when they pulled out the slip of paper and the book, I looked at it, and I was so thankful that throughout elementary school, I had never been called Titler. But I told them, you know, for the reason I'm buying this book, I'm honored to be called a tit. So just for today, so my name is Avi Gitler, and you've already heard I'm the co-founder and co-organizer with the National Audubon Society of the Audubon Mural Project. We partnered 7 years ago to depict, at the time, 314 North American bird species that had been deemed threatened by climate change in this century by the National Audubon Society. That report has since been updated. Normally I go through an explanation, but I think this crowd is well aware of survival by degrees. We presently in New York City have depicted approximately 130 birds in close to 100 installations, of which I am very proud. Yumi Rodriguez, the young woman you saw in the video, is one of our participating artists. And Yumi is someone who really excites me about the future. And I know Jessica has interacted with Yumi, and I'm sure she agrees. Yumi is the very rare artist who, like Jessica, actually approached us and said, I live in this neighborhood. I grew up on 162nd Street. I am just absolutely thrilled about what you are doing. And she secured permission on her grandfather's barber shop, where he had cut hair for decades, on 163rd Street. I don't know if you know that. In Liz's district. And she got permission from the barbers to make a mural of a climate-threatened bird. And her grandfather had always called her his little hummingbird. And Yumi depicted the Rufus hummingbird and wrote some accompanying text because she didn't want to just show the hummingbird. She also wanted to depict other flora and fauna that are threatened, maybe not just by climate change, but other issues that face these species. And she is the best of what this project can be, not to the exclusion of anybody else. And we have had all these wonderful partnerships over the years, and I'm honored that I'm sitting at table 11, table 11, with leaders like Catherine Heinz from New York City Audubon. And we couldn't do the work well that we do without organizations like New York City Audubon, which organizes our walking tours. And I'm very thankful for people like Lee Hallingby, who has given, I want to say dozens, but really I should say scores, if not hundreds, if not 1,000 tours. And, you know, on the bright side of COVID, with virtual tours. But this is a brief overview of the Mural Project and some of our partnerships. I'd love to bring some of my co-panelists in. First, Jessica, what drew you to the Audubon Mural Project? I mean, how do you come to us?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Jessica. let's see, back in 2018, Gabriel Willow, who many of you have probably heard of, a superstar birder, had invited me as artist in residence on Governor's Island for New York City Audubon, and he introduced me to Avi. And then in December, when Carlos and John's mural went up, which you saw in this video, I was absolutely deeply inspired. That mural is installed on 163rd and my studio is on 162nd. And so when I saw it, I wrote to Avi right away and said, oh, it's my time. I'm ready to make a mural. I want to make something. Can only hope to make something as beautiful.
A mosaic.
A mosaic, right? So I've never made a mural before, and I've never made a mosaic before. But Avi is gracious enough to allow me to experiment. So I happened to be making a series of bird collages at the time that I reached out. So the timing was right. And these bird collages were made from recycled photo scraps from a previous project. And the series is called All the Birds I've Ever Met in New York City, 1983 to the present. And I think I'm up to 98. And so it's a work in progress. And these photo scraps were taken from a series I'd been working on last fall in quarantine called Walking Broadway, Signs of Life on the Wecquaesgeek Trail, in which I walked the length of Broadway in Manhattan and the Bronx, and took a photo of an element of nature on every block. And then I cut it out in a circle, so there were all these photo scraps. So anyway, I was making birds. I love art. I love birds. And I said, I want to make a mural too. And also, you know, I had the terrible disease, nature blindness for 30 some odd years, until I took a New York City street tree identification class about 6 years ago, which kind of opened the door to a hunger, like a passionate hunger to know all of the, as Robin Wall Kimmerer says, more than human world around us. So that's how
I am a native New Yorker and suffered from the same nature blindness. I don't know about you, Liz, and I remember about.
I remember learning about trees when the former Parks Commissioner did a street tree census. And that was kind of my in to learning about urban nature. So, yeah.
About 20 years ago, I went on a walk not far from here with Wildman Steve Brill, who some of you may be aware of. And I didn't know there was anything growing in this city that I could actually eat without poisoning myself.
Lots of things.
So I've suffered from the same nature blindness. And I think that's one of the really interesting things about the Mural Project is I think it has the capacity to reach a new audience. I mean, that was the very idea when it was hatched. In my other life...
I see what you did there.
What's that? Yeah.
I see what you did there.
In my other life, I deal in art and I believe religiously in the power of art. And I'd love for you, Liz, to talk about the role as the chair of the Parks and Culture Committee at CB12. Talk about the role that art can play in public policy and conservation.
Oh, that's a really big question. So there's a reason why the Community Board 12's Parks Committee became the Parks and Cultural Affairs Committee, because there's a real interplay between art and culture and open spaces. So in Community Board 12, which is 155th Street up to the northern tip of Manhattan, we are blessed with roughly 40% of our land being parks. We have 14 miles of shoreline and hundreds of acres of parks, including the last bit of natural growth, old growth forest on Manhattan, and lots of birds. So there's a real interplay between where and how you have art, do art, whether it's dance, theater, spoken word, what have you, and public spaces. We do a lot of arts programming in public parks, and we have a lot of the natural world informing our art, most spectacularly with the Audubon Mural Project. You get out of the subway, and for some of them, they're these small, sweet, intimate works, but some of them are the entire side of a 5-story building. You can't miss that. You just...
For better or for worse, yeah.
I don't know anybody, sure, but I don't know anybody who regards that as for worse. I don't know. There are lots of people for whom these murals might not be their top priority, but in a world where nobody agrees on anything. There's nobody that I know who sees these murals and says, oh, ick. I mean, everybody thinks they're fantastic.
I mean, the interesting thing is, for so long we were painting murals, and then, we've tried to make the project and the installations more dynamic, and there is actually an interplay at times between our role, our goals, the kind of world that we want to live in, and the actual art that we're creating. I mean, which leads me to ask Jessica to talk a little about her process for the project that she is doing. And if I could just set it up, the wall is at 173rd and Broadway.
Right. Yes.
And it's a brick wall. And in case it isn't already clear, this is all legal. We have permission. So we approached this landlord who's been very agreeable in allowing us to do things. And he's allowed us to paint buildings and make installations. And the very first mosaic, which you saw on the screen, done by Carlos Pinto and John Sear. And funnily enough, it's a total coincidence, but there was an image in the video of Liz herself installing a mosaic. It was really interesting because what I love about their process is that they build about 90% of the mosaic. And this is a 21-foot long mosaic. I don't know if any of you ever have custom mosaic in your home, but these things take a great deal of time. They built it over a period of 6 months in their studio, but they only finished 90% of it. And they leave 10% unfinished. And under COVID guidelines, when we installed this mosaic in December of this past year, because we wanted to do something during COVID, we didn't want for the year to finish without doing a single new installation. They installed it, but they leave 10% unfinished. So every time someone walked by, they would ask, would you like to install a tile? And they'd have glass and mirrors and little bits and pieces. And people would come in and they would be a part of the installation. So it was really it brings a tear to my eye. It was this communal effort that so many people feel ownership over. And I'm absolutely thrilled about Jessica's installation, and she'll tell you more about it now, but there is an element of community to it as well. Can you elaborate on your process?
So after seeing John and Carlos's mural, I wanted to do a mural too, and a mosaic too. And so I was pacing Highbridge Park for ideas, and there was all of this glass. Highbridge is one of the lesser maintained parks in Upper Manhattan. There's a lot of glass in the parks. We'll talk later. And at one point the glass just was calling out to me, use us. So I started these glass foraging days where at first it was just me. I would go out and collect the glass and color coordinate it, color sort it. But people would ask me, what are you doing? People from all walks of life would walk by, what are you doing every day down in the dirt? And I would explain, I'm doing this mural project. And people were really interested and would begin helping me right then and there. And I'd say, no, please let me give you gloves. Don't do that. So it's been a surprisingly communal project in that way. But also, I think I'm going to be the first mural that doesn't actually depict the bird itself, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So most of these other are more representational, even if they're abstracted. I thought that the absence of the bird itself would kind of speak to this idea of displacement that the theme that we're talking about here with climate change. So I've selected the American robin, because generally in my artwork, I like to work with the familiar and see the sensational and exciting in the familiar. And the robin is ubiquitous. And so if even the robin's habitat is threatened, we know that we're in trouble. And so anyway, I'm working with the robin's song in the form of a spectrogram. So I'm creating these sound clouds. Picture these two cloud shapes with the robin's language written out in this glass. And one of the elements, which I'm still trying to figure out how to do safely, is I would like to cast the hands of local residents engaged in environmental stewardship into concrete and have them protrude from the wall in the form of like a kind of...
In a way that's safe.
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
We're always thinking about litigation here in New York.
Have you thought about a negative impression rather than a positive impression?
The hand will actually be protruding from the wrist so it's sort of in this welcoming pose of sanctuary That's the intention. Yeah.
Yeah. Liz, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the role a project like this plays in the community, more specifically, sorts of ways in which, you think we can get more involved. I mean, Jessica has done such an admirable job in incorporating people in that way that Carlos and John did. And I was wondering if there are other ways that you think, like you see us going forward, how we can take this in new directions.
Well, I mean, I think part of the best advertisement for the Audubon Mural Project is the murals themselves. So when they were first going up, there was a lot of, what is this? Now that there is, because there is, I guess it's an Instagram handle, because it's easy to find out through hashtags and just through the sheer visibility of the project, what the project is, there's less of a hurdle.
Right.
There's a lot more familiarity. So from people may not know the Audubon Mural Projects, but when you say, yeah, that 5-story thing on 155th and Broadway, they're like, oh, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. So when people talk about the project, I think people want that. And the more spread out that it's gotten, at first, when it first started, I think people thought of it as more central to the Audubon Terrace, the Trinity Cemetery, where Audubon himself is buried.
Yeah.
But as it has expanded and people see more of these in their community when they come out of the subway, it builds upon itself. I think that, as you know, there are a lot of landlords who have concerns in terms of liability issues and do I really want that construction happening? But the more of it that you do, it seems like the more familiarity there is and the more welcome that there is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the cool thing is, the project started in New York, and
I didn't realize that you had expanded to other cities.
Yeah. What a lot of people don't
That's
realize
fantastic.
is there is an appetite for these things, and this started maybe about 5 years ago. I think it was Great Lakes Audubon. Or maybe that's Audubon Great Lakes. Great Lakes Audubon. They initiated our first satellite project. So in Chicago, in Rogers Park, there's a series of 8 regionally threatened birds that have been depicted. And there are other projects. Funnily enough, our second project was also in Illinois. The president of Sinisippi Audubon in Rockford, Jennifer Kuroda, who deserves so much credit for all of her extraordinary work that her name needs to be dropped. She's organized 8 extraordinary large-scale murals. Every time I talk to her, I tell her, you're looking me look real bad. I don't know if you've seen any of the images, but the works are extraordinary. And if you want to go to Rockford, she'll host you and find you a wall. But also, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, given that Marshall is here, I know it's not North Dakota. At least I don't think it's North Dakota. But in Bozeman, there's a series of murals that were organized by a biology institute. And they chose to not just depict climate-threatened birds, but species of flora and fauna that are threatened by with other issues. And so I think that's one of the interesting things about the project. I mean, for me, I've always said that the project, it can be almost anything to anybody. Yes, it can be used as a platform to talk about climate science. It can be a conduit for a conversation about nature or birds in the urban environment. And it was really nice for me to see in Bozeman someone take it in a new direction to talk about other issues.
So, I mean, one of the things that I found interesting during COVID is that we've had to be outside more by ourselves. So there's only so many times you can take a walk around the block. So this has been an interesting opportunity for people to explore their neighborhoods, get around and walk more. There are definitely people who are doing their own walking tours of these murals. There are ways in which not so much now, noise and traffic have returned to the city, but there was certainly a point in the beginning of the pandemic when you could hear birds. It was quiet enough that you could hear birds, and people realized that birds were very much a part of the urban landscape. So the interplay between hearing birds and seeing these murals as people were out walking in the neighborhoods really connected the natural world to the artistic world, to people's everyday experiences. And that's powerful.
And I think, one of the things that motivates me as an artist and as a bird lover and nature lover is I've been holding this question of how can I use the gift of art to inspire care, to inspire people to notice and observe and awaken to the sense of awe and wonder that I feel when on Monday, I went birding and I met a mourning warbler and a gray-cheeked thrush, which I think is pretty special. And it's just incredible feeling. And so I think a lot of for me, what's motivating me is how can I inspire others to care and notice, see the nature around them.
But have you seen the bald eagles in Inwood Hill Park?
I sure have. And it blew my mind. They're
Pretty
dinosaurs.
cool.
Yeah.
Well, on behalf of the Audubon Mural Project and Jessica and Liz, we're really thankful for the attention and the honor you've given us in hearing about the project, and for those who have supported us in many different ways. We thank you for that support. It's wonderful being here. And we'll now hear from Audubon New York Policy Manager Erin McGrath with an update on an action you can all take to help climate-threatened birds here in New York.
Hello, everyone. I'm Erin McGrath, Policy Manager for New York. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your support. As we've all just seen, the Audubon Mural Project is raising awareness about the threat of climate change to birds and inspiring people to take action. One of the most effective actions we can take is making our collective voice heard by our state elected officials. That's why I'm asking you to tell Governor Hochul that you support amending the New York State Freshwater Wetlands Act. Wetlands, both big and small, provide critical habitat for birds ranging from the least bittern to the short-eared owl to the black-crowned night heron you see here on the screen. These wetlands also benefit people by filtering pollutants, heavy metals, and sediments from our drinking water. And they provide much-needed flood protection from powerful storms like Hurricane Ida. Right now, 1 million acres of New York's small and isolated freshwater wetlands are unprotected. The state has already lost half of its freshwater wetlands, so let's not lose any more. This legislation will empower the Department of Environmental Conservation to keep these habitats safe from pollution and development so they can support the birds and other wildlife that depend on them for survival. Please go to the link on the screen to send an email to the governor urging her to support this important amendment. I hope you've enjoyed today's event, and thank you so much for supporting our work.
Let's have another round of applause for the Audubon Mural Project. Appreciate the three of you coming to talk. Maybe I'll wait for a minute. So I know most of you couldn't see it, but while they were talking, there was an ovenbird walking around on the ground back here. It didn't really get nervous until it got immediately behind Jessica. Then it was like, whoa. So we were graced by one of those birds Scott was telling us about was going to arrive in our park here. I also got some good news. I'm going to deviate from the program just briefly to share some news that just came across that I think you'll all be interested in. I'm just going to read the headline. Critical migratory bird protections restored by Biden-Harris administration. You'll have to get the details later, but incredible news, something we've been working on for a long time that is going to be helpful in our fight to protect these birds and the places they need. So also, thank you, Erin, for that recorded message and for bringing that forward, that critically important issue that impacts so many birds in our flyway. I hope everyone here will consider contacting Governor Hochul to urge her support for amending the New York State Freshwater Wetlands Act. I'd also like another round of applause for all of today's speakers and panelists, Marshall, Scott, Avi, Jessica, and Liz, and for our dedicated board members, Sally and Vicki. I think you can tell that all of them are putting their minds and their hearts to work in unique ways to protect the birds and the places they need. So thank you all. And also to all of you here at Tavern on the Green and those of you joining us virtually, thank you for supporting our programs in New York and Connecticut. Our work would not be possible without your generosity. Thank you. If you haven't yet had a chance to make a contribution to support Audubon's work here in New York, I'm going to ask you to do something that we rarely do, although I just did it a minute ago, is take out your phones. You can take out your phone, it's okay. In addition to the pledge cards that are on your tables here, you can make a donation by texting Audubon, that's AUDUBON, to the number 243725. If you're joining virtually, the number should be on the bottom of your screen. And here in person, you can see the number on these screens, or it's on your program as well. Thank you again for everyone's generosity. It means so much to our work. And one last heartfelt thank you to our extraordinarily generous supporters for this event: Ginny Stowe, Lee Strickler, and Lori Hodgson. A special thanks to our event organizing committee and Audubon New York Board of Directors for your efforts in making this event such a success, especially in today's ever-changing landscape. I can't think of a better way to celebrate the extraordinary legacy of Tom Keesee than by recognizing individuals who are advancing conservation in so many different ways. Working together, we'll slow climate change, improve habitat, protect birds, other wildlife, and the places that we all depend on. We're bringing a broader range of people into the conservation fold. We're amplifying the voice for conservation locally, across our states, throughout the country and the hemisphere. Thank you again for joining us today. We hope to see you all again soon.